In this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about placing custom hairs on a character using Ornatrix in 3dsMax. Earlier, I had created several videos about putting fur on this particular character, our marmot character. And at this point, I wanted to go ahead and place some whiskers on the character. And I ran into a couple of issues planting custom hairs as I would need to for this. So I thought I would share some of the things I ran into and some of the solutions I found. So you might recall this character if you've looked at any of the previous videos. And I'm not so interested in the fur on the body of the character at this point, but like I said, I want to place some whiskers on the snout. And in fact, I'll go ahead and place some eyebrows here at the same time as I do that. I'll bring up a picture here and we can maybe take a look at, sorry, that's Materials Editor, of here's just a view of what you might be looking at with the whiskers and the eyebrows. They're these pretty tall eyebrows. They're not really bushy, they're just hairy. And then you'll also notice that where the follicles come out of the snout, there are these distinctive marks, locations on the snout in the fur. And in fact, we see those in this texture map I have on the marmot. I've got a little bit of the fur showing right here. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off because I'm not interested in that. And so we have sort of a scrawny, disembodied hollow mesh here. I've turned off everything, including eyeballs and stuff, so we're just working with the mesh. I'm going to create these hairs as a separate set of hairs distinct from the fur, because I'll be exporting this stuff out to Unreal Engine through Alembic. And it's just easier if I have the whiskers and the eyebrow hairs as separate entities that I can also bind inside of Unreal to the same mesh. But for the purposes of working on them, I'm going to go ahead and separate out the parts of the mesh, the polygons, where the things that I want to work on are located. Now, rather than take you through that process, I've already done it, and I'll go ahead and turn on this other mesh, which I'm going to use to put the hairs on. In fact, I don't need to see the actual full geometry anymore. This is just fine. So this represents the snout area and an area above the eyes where maybe I want to have some of these long eyebrows distributed. I've gone ahead and added a custom texture map to this, which corresponds to the locations of the sort of the little divots in the snout, the areas where the follicles come out, just so I can really make sure I have hairs there. You can take a look at these images. I'll show them to you here. Here is the actual original texture map that's on the body, and if we zoom in, you can actually see a little bit of those follicle locations on the snout, but I wanted to make them a little more pronounced so I can place them with a little more accuracy. So I went ahead and created a very basic black and white image with just black dots representing where those are. That is the material you're seeing on this subset of polygons, which were just separated out as a clone from the original mesh so I could simplify my work. First thing I'm going to do is actually go ahead and just furball this sucker. I'm going to go ahead and add furball to that. Well, I want to make sure I have this thing selected. There we go. Let's do that. All right, let's furball that sucker. And looks pretty crazy, not really what I want, but it just gets me a start, right? So in the number of guides, I'm going to crank this down to about 60, and then the length really around 7 or 8 maybe centimeters. I think that'll get me good long whiskers. And I'll type in a good amount of randomness there, maybe like 75%. I'll get some long ones and some short ones. In this little stack that the furball default preset creates, I'm going to go ahead and select hair from guides. And in this case, I'm not interested in distributing a bunch of hairs around the guides randomly. I just want to make the guides hairs themselves, and that's an option in the generation method. So once I do that, I have what looks like a bunch of toothpicks sticking out of my mesh. That's fine. And really, hair from guides, I don't need to do anything else with. The number of guides, the preview fraction, none of that. I have actually about 60 hairs showing here. There's a width change modifier added on top, which has given them this look, which is just fine for now. What I want to look at next is some of the options in edit guides to deal with the roots. Of course, up here on the mesh that represents the eyebrows, a random distribution of hairs is just fine, and I'm perfectly okay with what I see there. But down on the snout, my whole point was to go ahead and place hairs exactly where I want on the mesh, where I can see these black dots very clearly. If I scroll down into the root parameters, and here are the root operations. By default, modify roots is selected, and what that means is if you select any one of the roots, you can go ahead and move it around and it will stay normal to the surface, stuck on the surface, and you can transform it. This was the first problem I ran into. If I grab this and now I move it around, sometimes I have trouble. Some of the roots won't actually move when I do this. These are actually moving, but my solution to this problem when I found roots I couldn't move was to ensure that I was working in a perspective viewport, believe it or not. This orthographic view is something, not totally, but a little bit unique to Max. I work in it a lot. Other people probably don't. If you're in Maya, I understand this to be an orthographic view, like a top, front, or a left, that you then go ahead and tumble. And now you can duplicate this axonometric type of view. But if you're having trouble moving your roots, it is likely due to the fact that you're not in a perspective view. I haven't seen that documented anywhere, but I ran into this problem right away. The first time I did this, I couldn't move any of my roots, and I didn't know why, and that was the solution. Seems kind of weird, but that's it. So with 30 or 40 or 50 hairs or something, you can go in one by one and move them around and position them where you want to. Pardon me, zoomed out a little farther. But you might be thinking the other way to go, which is what I initially thought, which would be to go ahead and use the plant option and just place roots on the surface. And you would think you could go ahead and do that and just hit click where you want, you'll get something. And in this case, it will work and kind of okay. But there are some caveats to this, and I wanted to highlight those. So I'll Control Z out of that. And on a mesh like this, it's going to be a little tough to see what I wanted to show you. So I'm going to go ahead and just create something with a little bit more aggressive normal differences, maybe a sphere over here. And then I'm going to go ahead and furball this sucker. And go ahead and do the same things I just did a moment ago. Bear with me as I type in some of these parameters. I think exactly what I did last time. Guides as hairs. There we go. And I'll go into Edit Guides, and I should be able to go to Roots. Go ahead, select a root, and move it around on the surface. So that's working as we would expect. However, if you just go ahead and hit Plant, you're going to run into some things you need to know about. And that'll become obvious as soon as I try to plant another root, aka guide, somewhere on here. And I'll go up somewhere pretty different, up here by the North Pole, and I'll click again. And you can see that the orientation of this guide is not what I was expecting, and probably not what I want. I would want something perpendicular to the surface, something following the surface normal, more like what I'm seeing on the rest of these. I'll Control Z out of that. And the reason this is happening is that I have Adopt Shape on. And some of this is documented in the help file if you read up on it. With Adopt Shape on, the new strand, as it says here in the little help tag, will adopt the shape of any previously selected strand. So you saw that one I just clicked on, and it was oriented exactly as this strand is. If I go ahead and click a different strand, maybe this one, and I go back to Plant and I leave Adopt Shape on, and I'll click in the same place, and now I get a hair whose orientation matches the thing I had selected a moment ago, which was this hair down here. And in fact, this newly created hair, so long as Adopt Shape is on, will inherit all the properties of the previously selected hair. If it has a custom shape on it, its scale, its size, it will inherit those things. So if I'm going to plant hairs, this is not really going to work for me. I want hairs to just pop out of the surface the way all of these are. Hairs, guides, roots. If you uncheck Adopt Shape, you will kind of get what you want, but it comes with its own caveats. So I'll go back here and do the same thing. I have a hair selected, and I'll click up here on the top of the sphere. And now I do indeed get a hair which is perpendicular to the surface, following the surface normal, pretty much like what I'd want. However, this hair happens to be 50 centimeters long. 50 centimeters is the default length of a hair in the function that creates guides and routes originally in Ornatrix. And so without adopt shape, it has nothing to reference, and it falls back on its default creation parameters, and that is a guide that is 50 centimeters long. This is probably also not what you want. And because they're all 50 centimeters, as you create new guides, and this makes it kind of quick, they have no randomization, and they're also probably not the length you want. Maybe you want ones longer than 50 centimeters. Either way, it's probably not what you want, and now you have this extra work to go in and customize those hairs the way you want. Another option I found was to go ahead and select all of the guides on the mesh, leave adopt shape on, and now if I go hit plant and I create a new hair here, I get one that is about the same length as the other guys and is pretty much normal to the surface. This one looks like it really is, but you'll find sometimes they're not exactly normal to the surface. The other caveat to this is that if I want to click and create another hair, well, I have adopt shape on, it's going to inherit all the properties of the currently selected hair. That's not really what I want either. So I'll right click and get out of the planting operation, select all the hairs again, go back to plant, and now I can put a hair up here, and I get one that is pretty much normal to the surface and has a length that is similar to the surrounding hairs. So it's taking a look at all of the hairs and using that to help with its creation parameters. And I think it's kind of proximity based. The closer you are to another hair, the more you'll get a hair like that one. But it does involve this 2 to 3 step process. Every time you want to create a hair, get out of the plant operation, select all the existing ones, go back into the plant operation, and click again. Neither of the planting solutions, either with adopt shape or without it, is really ideal for just a quick, rapid workflow. I'll show you now again back on my snout how that's going to work. I'm going to delete this and delete my sphere and go back to my snout and show you why it's still a little bit problematic. I'll go ahead and select my hairs and go to edit guides, go down to roots, and I'll go ahead and hit plant. And right now I have a hair selected right here, and so any other hair that I click is going to have this exact orientation in terms of its how it's pointing. And that's true on the opposite side. If I go over here and I click, say I want to put a hair on this black dot, well, see, it's now inherited the orientation of the previous hair, and I don't want that. It might seem fine if I'm over on this side of the mesh, probably okay to do this side, then select a hair and go ahead and do them on the other side. The other option is to do what I did before on the sphere. I'll go ahead and select all the hairs, go into plant, and I'll go click one there. Now I get one of a proper orientation and a length that is consistent with the other hairs around it. So that's a possibility, but you might find it easier to just go ahead and select the existing hairs and move them into position. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and of course you don't need to hang around and watch all that, so I'll blow through this when I edit the video and we can move on with something else. Okay, so now I've got my whiskers sort of in place, and I've got a few extras that don't belong in those divots, and that's okay. I don't mind having some extra whiskers sticking out here and there. The next thing I'm going to go ahead and do is just do a little preliminary sculpting to these to get them into position. That's nothing fancy. That's just going down to the brush tool, and that's located down here at the bottom. And I'll set my brush to comb, and this should be pretty straightforward. Just go ahead and if they're a little wonky, that's okay too. I'm going to use some modifiers to really customize them in terms of their shape. and randomness. I just want to get them sort of flowing in the right direction. Same thing with the eyebrow hairs. I maybe want to get those, give them a little direction. So something like that's maybe a good start. The next thing I want to do is take advantage of the group options, strand groups, so that I can apply some modifiers to the whiskers but not have those same effects apply to the eyebrows. So I'll go ahead and select all the whiskers, and down here in the groups option or strand groups, I will type in a new group number, say 1, and hit assign for these. And then I will go ahead and select all these guys. I'll type in a new group, say 2, go assign. And now you can see that they are separated out as entities that I can apply modifiers to individually, kind of like material IDs on a mesh. So let's go ahead and go to 1 and hit select, and I get the whiskers. And obviously if I were to type in group 2 and hit select, I'd get them. But there's this nice little button here, says next. That means whatever the next group selected is, click go to it, and I get those. So that's going to help me with what I want to do on the whiskers. I want to add a bit of curling on the whiskers, some randomization that way, and I will do that with a curling modifier in Ornatrix. But before I do that, I want to add some extra detail to these guys, because right now they only have 10 segments, and that might not truly show me what's going on with the curling. So I'll go ahead and add a detail modifier, and I want it to apply only to group 1, which is the whiskers. And I'm going to go ahead and crank this up to something crazy, because I'll set it back down. I just want it there while I work on it to like 100 segments. So I should be able to see all the subtle little details in the curvature modifier, which I'm going to add next. So that's curling. And I also only want this to apply to the first group. So I'll go ahead and say under the strand group, group 1, enter. And now that's only applying to the whiskers. So that's a nice little thing to do, having this ability to separate out what you're doing. Not all of the modifiers have the ability to separate out for groups. I think the length modifier might be one that doesn't allow you to do that. I can't remember. I'll go ahead and change some of the settings here, just because this is a little bit more curly-Q than I want for my whiskers. The magnitudes may be a little much. I'll get some curling happening really right out of the gate, rather than have it just happen more toward the tip. So I'll crank it up a little bit more influence closer toward the root. I'll add in some randomness to that too. Phase is like it is on all of the modifiers for Ornatrix. The higher the number, the smaller the permutations are. So in this case, you know, what was there really wasn't too bad, but it was a little too much. So maybe, you know, a little curvature, like maybe down around 0.5, huh? And we'll add a bunch of randomness to that, as much as I can get. I will have some noise going on here. This may be, scale may be a little much. And you could go in and do some more sculpting to this and add some more modifiers if you want to. But I think that this gets across the core things I wanted to mention. Thanks.